If you're just starting your first garden, now is the perfect time to get started with permaculture while you're in the design phase. But even if you've already got an established garden, this guide will help you to slowly transition your existing garden to more sustainable design. How do you start a permaculture garden? Decide where you will want your garden to go, observe your land and see what makes sense for your area. Design your garden, add in water systems and other infrastructure, and then plant your perennials before annuals. In this video, you'll learn what a permaculture garden is, how to make one step by step, the main permaculture principles to abide by, and some suggestions for real permaculture projects you can add to your own garden. 1. What is permaculture gardening? A permaculture garden is one that takes advantage of the aspects of nature like the sun, wind, and water, to work for you instead of against you. Conventional gardening tends to have a one-size-fits-all approach. Take square-foot gardening, for example. Although it's productive, it's not very natural. Soil is made perfectly uniform and divided up into exact segments, with specific numbers of plants in each segment. In contrast, a permaculture garden is more like art than science. How you design your garden will depend on what makes the most sense for your particular piece of land, and the climate and ecosystems that already exist there. Permaculture puts more emphasis on building up soils gradually over time so they're well balanced and full of nutrients. Now that you have the basic mindset needed, let's talk about exactly how to go about starting your permaculture garden, step by step. 2. Decide on your location. If you already have a fairly large backyard, that's the most obvious place to get started with your garden. The only factor you'll need to consider is in which part of the yard your garden will go. For other people without such easy access to land, they might already get hung up at this step before they even begin. Don't fret if you're thinking to yourself, but I live in an apartment. There are ways to help start your own permaculture garden or help contribute to other people's gardens regardless of whether you have access to land of your own or not. If you haven't even got a balcony, then you should be joining a community garden. Most cities nowadays have plots of public land set aside where people can collectively garden. I'd highly recommend it, as it's a great opportunity to meet other gardeners who likely have years of experience and advice to share. If you rent an apartment, you can ask your landlord if it would be possible to create a garden on the roof. This would have been unheard of years ago. But now many cities around the world are offering tax credits to building owners who add green roofs to their structures. So the building owner might be happy to let you grow plants on the roof in exchange for being able to take advantage of such a tax savings. If you have nearby friends who have a yard, ask if they'd be willing to let you use a portion of their yard to create a permaculture garden. So don't give up. Where there's a will, there's a way. 3. Observe your land. Before you make any decisions about how you're going to plan out your garden, it's best to just take a moment and observe what already exists on the land that you're planning to use. This step might seem obvious, but don't skip it. After looking out at your yard hundreds of times, you may feel like you know everything about it. But if you actually get out and take a walk around to immerse yourself in it, you may find out things you didn't know. Here are some questions you should ask yourself. Is there actually a bit of a slope in one section of your yard? Does the ground seem to pool in one part of the yard after it rains, where it might be too wet for things to grow? Do you have a big tree in your yard where you won't want to plant, because the ground is too full of roots and its leaves will block out too much sunlight? What kinds of animals and insects, both beneficial and pests, do you see as you look around? What areas get the most sun in the morning versus the afternoon? 4. Design your garden. Design and planning is a huge part of permaculture, so don't skip on this step either. A good design will save you lots of effort, while a poorly designed garden will be a thorn in your side for many years to come. Based on your initial observations, you should have a good idea of different factors such as shade, elevation, and areas where children will play or people will gather which you can plan around. Also take note of water sources you'll use and plan around them. Whether that's a water tap on the outside of your home, a pond, or something else. Think about where you want to put various annual or perennial plants, and how much space they'll take up as they grow over time. I recommend trying to make a detailed sketch of your garden plans, rather than just having a vague idea in your head and trying to wing it. When you put it down on paper, you might realize some aspect of it doesn't make sense. And it's a lot easier to take out your eraser and fix it at that point, instead of doing it once you're out working in the dirt. You can always change your design as your goals or needs change. Taking a few minutes to measure out your yard will allow you to make a more accurate drawing. 5. Put in water systems and other infrastructure. Water systems can be the difference between your permaculture garden succeeding or failing. Water is a valuable resource that you need to keep and use in sustainable ways. During the design phase, you should have figured out which areas of your property water tends to pool, where it runs away from your property, and where water is needed the most. Depending on how much space you have to work with, you might want to put in a swale, a ditch where water can collect, where water is naturally pooling anyway. Or you can set up rain capture from your roof to be stored in barrels or cisterns, so you can use it for watering or washing crops and tools. 6. Build and prepare your beds. Permaculture generally calls for doing the least destructive changes possible, so once you decide where your garden is going to go, your best bet is probably sheet mulching or spot planting. Sheet mulching, also called lasagna gardening, is a way of creating a larger plantable area. It's called lasagna gardening because it involves stacking alternating layers of materials like leaves, straw, wood chips, cardboard, compost, and others in a way that would look like a slice of lasagna as a cross-section. Grass doesn't need to be dug up, you simply start mulching on top of it, and the grass underneath will die and become part of the soil as well. Sheet mulching takes less effort than having to remove grass and till the soil before planting. So if you want to start a garden and it's already spring or summer, this might be a better option for you. The downside is that you don't get nutrients added to the soil like with sheet mulching, so you may need to amend the soil with compost or an organic slow-release fertilizer. It's also a good idea to cover the area with straw as a mulch when you're done planting, to help suppress weeds and keep in water. 7. Plant perennials first. The first stage of planting your garden should be worrying about where the perennials will go. Because these are the plants that are going to come up year after year, and they'll be a regular staple of the garden. You'll want to be sure to pick crops that make sense for your planting zone. Trying to grow lemons in Minnesota or the UK makes a lot less sense than in Florida or Spain. If possible, pick native plants, as they'll be the best suited for your area of all. You should be able to find plants that meet those criteria but still provide the fuel, fiber, and food that you need. You can plant perennials from seed, but many of them like asparagus or fruit trees will take several years before they start to produce, so it's better to get some transplants or bare root saplings to minimize the time before you're able to start harvesting from them. 8. Add in annuals. Your permaculture garden probably isn't going to look like much of a garden yet, after all you've added in so far as perennials. You might have a bunch of young fruit and nut trees, and some asparagus and rhubarb and other transplants. But overall your garden probably just looks like a bunch of twigs at this point. For the first few years of your garden, you probably want to add in lots of annuals to fill all the extra space, while your perennials are still taking root. The good news is that most of the popular and well-known vegetables we enjoy are annuals. Like beans, peas, tomatoes, peppers, squash, and others. You can also add in flowers and lots of greens to give more of a permaculture look to your garden. Sunflowers are a great plant for filling lots of space. Plus they're low maintenance, you'll get lots of seeds from them if you're lucky, and you can chop and drop their large stalks at the end of the growing season to add a bunch of nutrients back into the soil. If you're relying on your garden for either food or income, annuals will definitely make up the bulk of either for your first couple of years. 9. Watch your garden grow and maintain it. Starting a permaculture garden can seem like an overwhelming amount of work at first. But once you've got all your plants in the ground and you're into a routine of watering and tending to everything, don't forget to take a step back and appreciate what you've got. Your garden should give you joy just to observe and be around if you're passionate about it. Take this opportunity to learn how your garden works and see how various plant species grow and bloom for the first time. You'll get to enjoy the harvest of your healthiest and fastest producing plants in your first year, but a lot of the initial reward will just be seeing what's successful and working in general. Set some time aside every week or so to do some weeding. If you deal with weeds regularly, it's not too bad. But if you leave them for too long, they can quickly get out of control. 10. Composting. As your first season starts to draw to a close, you'll likely have a bunch of leftover plant matter. Now is the perfect time to really get your composting going, so you'll have some extra nutrient-rich soil ready for next year. Remember the principles of permaculture and try to run your garden as waste-free as possible, reincorporating any waste products back into the system. If you are still unsure whether a permaculture garden is right for you or not, Please watch the other videos we posted about this topic and leave us a comment if you have any questions.